Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So today we'll be doing a full in-depth guide on Ahri mid. In case you're new to the channel, I'm a multi-rank 1 challenger mid laner and I played 9 splits of pro play, so around 4.5 years. Ahri is a super strong champion right now and has been all season. The main point of Ahri is that she's good in pretty much every game, and this makes her, in my mind, the best blind pick mid laner in the game right now. So if you haven't played her already this season, I'd highly recommend putting some time into her, and you'll definitely be rewarded with a lot of LP. Let's kick things off with Ahri's runes. So fortunately, Ahri, she doesn't have many runes for you guys to learn. The main tree that you will be taking is this Electrocute tree here. So Electrocute is the best keystone on Ahri most of the time. When it comes to the miners runes, there's also not that much variation. You can take something like Sudden Impact here, but given that Ahri, kind of her only real weakness is in that like pre-6 laning phase, I find Taste of Blood to help here a lot. Here you could swap Eyeball Collection to Ghost Power if you really wanted to, but I find it's pretty easy just to kind of like take Eyeball Collection and forget about it and not really need to invest more into like thinking about it. But you can take Ghost Power, although it's not super easy for you to use it early because again, as we'll see in the laning phase, Ahri does kind of struggle in the pre-6, so it's like a bit difficult for you to ward camps and stuff like that. Ultimate Hunter is going to be the best. There is an argument for Ingenious because a lot of the time you will build Everfrost, but I think especially in solo queue, Ahri is a champion that is very ult reliant. When she has her ult, she's very strong. When she doesn't, she's pretty weak. So I really like Ultimate Hunter, but there are some other options here that you could consider. Now, the secondary tree, I think the best is either Inspiration or Sorcery. So Inspiration has a lot of good choices. I really like Magical Boots and Minion DMAT. So what Minion DMAT allows you to do is it actually allows you to kill the backline of range creeps a level earlier. So if you put either, you can, it depends like how much AP you have obviously, but I like to do either 2 on the range creeps and 1 on melee creep, or all 3 on the range creeps. And that allows you, again, as we'll see in the laning phase, for your Q to one-shot the backline at around level 8, as long as you have some AP, and can actually be earlier than that if you have more AP, if you've gotten ahead. And I think that's really, really important because at that point in the game, it's really easy for you to kind of roam around, impact the map a lot, and once you have that level of wave clear, it's very easy for you to neutralize a lot of matchups. I really like Magical Footwear as well, so Ahri's a champion that can afford to take something greedy like this, because she has a lot of mobility in her kit already. You've got the W movement speed, you've got multiple dashes, you also have your E for self-peel, so you're not as reliant on getting boots in the early game in terms of like, for, you know, dodging ganks or just like playing against the skill shot champion in general. That being said, if you are versus a champion that is extremely heavy on skill shots, so if you're versus something like Syndra, I would recommend swapping out Magical Boots for Time Warp Tonic instead. In that case, the Corrupting Pod Time Warp Tonic movement speed will probably be better, so I'd be looking at taking Minion DMAT and Time Warp Tonic. One other thing you could take is you could take Cosmic instead of Magical Boots, but personally I think Magical Boots is a bit greedier and a bit better, although if you really felt like you needed Flash cooldown, I suppose you could take Cosmic, but I'm not the biggest fan, so I think these are the best. So for Sorcery, if you do want to take this, there are a couple things you can take. If you want a really greedy scaling page, you can go Absolute Focus Gathering Storm. This will give you a lot of AP in the kind of mid to late game, you know, around that like 20 to 30 minute mark. I don't take this that often. I think the only time I would really take it is when I'm versus a very, very weak laning champion and I know I'm going to get priority anyway, and so I don't really need like the minion DMAT to allow me to clear waves any quicker. So maybe if you're against a champ like Corki or Veigar, you could consider something like this. Alternatively, you can go Mana Flow Transcendence, which isn't bad either, but I just don't really feel like it's super valuable. Like, Ahri's not particularly mana hungry. Transcendence admittedly is nice, but I do think you overall get a bit more out of the inspiration page. So this is what I'd recommend. Attack speed, you have a couple choices here. You can go Adaptive Force, which can make it a bit easier to kill those kind of like that backline a little bit earlier. But I think attack speed is pretty useful in the early game. Again, most of the time you will be losing pre-6 on Ahri, and so the attack speed, just like being able to thin out waves, so that's a bit easier, I find to be quite nice. Obviously Adaptive for a second, and finally here, you can kind of just take whatever you need based on the matchup, like if you need armor or MR, or if you're a bit greedy, you can go with health. It doesn't really matter too much. I would just take kind of like whatever your preference is in this matchup. I will quickly talk about like 1 or 2 other rune pages. So this is very, very uncommon, but something that happens sometimes in pro play is you'll see Ahri's take Spellbook primary with basically any kind of secondary. So I'm not going to go too in depth into it, but the reason they do this is because in professional play, common counters to Ahri are champions like Vex, Lissandra, Veigar, so champions where you're kind of forced into taking cleanse. In competitive, not having TP is a big problem, so what they do is they take either Spellbook with TP, swap to cleanse at 6, or they take Spellbook cleanse and swap to TP at 6. So basically, this is not something I would worry about in solo queue, but I just bring it up if you're playing a competitive game for whatever reason. Taking Spellbook against these heavy CC champs can be better than Electrocute. Other than that, I don't really like any other keystones. There's stuff like Phase Rush and Ahri that you can do, but really, guys, I think if you're playing solo queue, just go with this page like 99% of the time. That's going to be the best for you. For Ahri's items, first off, your starting items, you have two real choices. If you're in an, I would say, an easy matchup, you can go Doran's Ring 2 pots. If you're in a matchup that you are going to take quite a bit of harass, I would go for the Corrupting Pot. I think like if you can get away with Doran's Ring, it is pretty good on Ahri, again, because it helps you reach that like AP breakpoint of clearing the back line with 1Q a little bit earlier, but definitely don't go this at the expense of like losing a lot of creeps for it. As I've said kind of many times already, Ahri's weakest point is the pre-6 lane, so getting through that point is really, really important. So again, yeah, if you're going to take a lot of damage in your lane, just go with Corrupting Pot. So this is really just going to be like mages that bully the lane hard, champs like Syndra, Orianna, Victor. Go for the Corrupting Pot. Otherwise, I'd say you can get away with Doran's Ring and Health 2 HP pots in most matchups. Now for your early buys, if you did start Doran's Ring, you can go refillable. It's not as important to buy this, like on other champs, right? If you start Doran's Ring 2 potions, you pretty much always want to get a refillable. It's not as important to Ahri because like Ahri can neutralize her lane a lot after those first 6 levels and also has a little bit of innate sustain. So this is kind of up to you, just like depending on your lane, how much damage you feel you're going to take, but you can kind of skip it if you want. Darksteel though, you should be picking this up at some point, basically every single game on Ahri. If you play well, it's pretty hard to die on this champ more than like a couple times, so you're almost always going to have like really high Darksteel stacks. And as with every AP champion, it gets a ton of value, so you should pretty much always be picking that up. Now, most likely you're taking magic boots, but if you're not, make sure to pick these up early, because if you're not taking magical boots, most likely you're in a matchup where skill shots are very important, so that movement speed will be really nice for you. Lost Chapter, this is definitely the best item you can buy if you can afford it. Gives you basically infinite mana, allows you to clear waves really easy. So if you can get Lost Chapter, pretty much just buy it, and it's going to be the best a lot of the time. Now, Seekers, I actually should add something here. I'll just quickly add a Kindle Gem. So when you're in matchups against like assassins that can be sort of difficult, you have a couple options. So if you're against AD or AP, you've got really the choice of Seeker's Arm Guard, Merc Treads, or Kindle Gem. So if you're against a champion that has a lot of CC as well as magic damage, or if you're against some kind of mid jungle that has a lot of CC, you might choose to rush Merc Treads, and this could be another reason that you don't take magical footwear. That being said, again, if you are against these champs, you might just want cleanse instead. So this is kind of up to you. You definitely don't want to go Merc Treads and cleanse. I would definitely say get one or the other. But yeah, you can really consider this against champions like Syndra. It makes the lane phase a little bit easier. Even with magic boots, it could be good just to pick up like the null magic mantle. So the let's see, where is it here? The 450 MR item. Yeah, and just like sit on that if you need a little bit of extra MR. If you're against an AD champion, you can go Seekers, but I think Seekers is honestly a lot worse than before. So I wouldn't go this unless you know you're building a Zhonya's second anyway, like they have a ton of AD or something like that. We'll get more into those items a bit later, but I would say unless you really, really need Seekers, don't buy it. And most of the time, you're just going to want a Kindle Gem instead. So because we'll be rushing Everfrost most of the time, Kindle Gem will probably be the best, allows us to just like keep on our build path and kind of gives us some tanky stats. So yeah, only go these if you really like need them situationally. Otherwise, if you do need defensive stats for the lane, just go Kindle Gem. Lastly, we have Lucidity Boots. So this is more just like if you base on an awkward amount of gold, it's completely fine to pick up Lucidity Boots. Again, most of the time you will be taking magical footwear, so this most likely isn't something you need to worry about. But if you're not, you can just pick up Lucidity kind of at any point, and that's pretty much fine. So talking about the boot options in general, as we just like discussed, we have Merc Treads if they have a lot of CC and a lot of AP damage. Do not buy this if you just need MR. So if you just need MR, you'll probably be building Banshees instead, and you don't want to waste gold on this. So, if you, basically if they have AP but not CC, don't buy these. But if they have a lot of CC and AP, you should probably be buying these. So yeah, that's pretty much it for that. The next one is like Sword Shoes and Lucidity. So in my opinion, if you're the solo AP on your team and you're itemizing Ludens, you probably want to go Sword Shoes and like double down on all that pen. But I think most of the time Lucidity Boots is better, and you should look at this and think not just about like who is like full AP damage, but also like all the kind of like secondary sources of APs. You know, you might have champs with mixed damage. You could have, you know, supports or Ezreal or, you know, tank tops that do a lot of magic damage. So just consider like basically if you're the only real magic damage on your team, Shok Ahri can be quite good. But otherwise, I really like Lucidities on this champ and they're a bit cheaper. So for your standard build, it is going to look something like this. We're going to have the Everfrost first item, Lucidity Boots second. After that, this will be your second item of choice. Like you can go Shadow Flame, you can go Lichbane, you know, a defensive item if you need it. We will talk about that down here in the situational items. But most of the time, I think you can just go Shadow Flame as your second core item. After that, you'll be wanting to pick up Rabadons and Void as like your third and fourth, basically in whichever order you need them. So if they have a lot of MR, you can pick up your Void stuff first and then your Rabadons. If they don't and you're just like getting a lot of AP, you can just go for the Rabadons first and then get the Void after. For your sixth item, it kind of just like becomes situational. Again, going to talk about that in a second. But Zhonya's is a really good sixth item if you're not sure what to buy. But there are some other good options as well. So for alternative mythics, we really only have two others. I think honestly, like Ludens is the only one that I go somewhat regularly. Again, if you're that like solo magic damage on the team, you really just want to put out a ton of damage, Ludens can be quite good. So that is an option. I don't really like Liandry's. Like Liandry's can be good if they have a lot of tanks, but there's just like, yeah, it does happen a bit more on Ahri because, like, as I normally say with this, the Liandry's is better if they have, like, a lot of tanks, right? But what I normally say is that if you're in a game with a lot of tanks, you don't really want to be playing a champ like Ahri. But the thing is, because Ahri is a blind pick and you might end up in these kind of games, it is fine to go Liandry's. Like, it's not really a bad item. It does give ability haste as well. So, yeah, it's not bad by any means, but I do think Everfrost is better most of the time. But if they do have, like, a ton of tanks, you can go the Liandry's instead of the Everfrost or instead of the Ludens, but I think most of the time, just stick to the Everfrost. It does allow you kind of to do a lot more, you know, hit the charms a bit easier by hitting the slow first, or like CCing those melee champions and stuff like that. One other thing I'll quickly say is Everfrost in general is better against like immobile targets or a bunch of melee champs, whereas like Ludens is like a bit of extra targeted damage and can be quite good against like more mobile range champs. So it's just like a little bit of extra thing to think about, but honestly not that important. So for situational items, I almost always go Magi's on Ahri, and the reason is that if you play this champion well, you really should not be dying. Ahri has so many tools to keep herself alive. She has like, you know, 3 to probably like 5 or even 8 dashes in a team fight sometimes. On top of that, she has like the W move speed, the charm stealth peel, and she's not really a champ that needs to dive heavily into the team. You know, it's not like, or if you do, like you can easily get out. It's not like you're fully committing when you go in. So I really like Magi's on the champ. It's very cheap and very, very effective. Now, Lichbane has a couple, honestly, like decent times that you can pick it up. You can pick it up as a second item or as a last item, which sounds sort of weird. So I think it is generally better later in the game because it does have some kind of like AP scaling on it. So obviously as you get more AP, typically becomes a bit more valuable, but picking it up second item isn't too bad either. Yeah, it can be pretty good in place of Shadow Flame, like if they're going to build a lot of MR, or again, like if they're a bit tanky, you could go something like Liandry's Lichbane, or if you wanted to play for a kind of like more, not split push win condition, but just like a side laning win condition, something like that, you could go Lichbane. I will say I don't go this that much, but it is like a pretty good second item as well. Oblivion Orb for healing reduction. I think this is pretty bad on Ahri, so you should only buy it when it's like absolutely necessary. I think healing cut in general just sort of sucks right now, so I kind of prefer to let my support buy it, or just like ignite people for healing reduction. I really think only buy this if they just have so much healing that you can't possibly ignore it, and I would say never upgrade it. It just really sucks right now. So I would just like not buy it unless you absolutely need it. Another thing is for your second item, you can pick up defensive items like Zhonya's or Banshees. That being said, you should only pick these up if you absolutely need them. One thing that I see a lot of lower elo players do is they don't realize that picking up defensive items hurts your damage output a lot. So obviously, if you're dead, you don't do any damage, right? But too often, I see defensive items picked up, which just, when they could just like avoid the damage by playing better, positioning better, you know, stuff like that. So on Ahri, when you have so many tools to play better, to avoid this damage, you know, you've got, like I said, all your dashes, self-peel, movement speed, you've even got a little bit of sustain, you should only be buying these defensive items against damage that is almost unavoidable. Like, it doesn't have to be literally unavoidable, but it's stuff like, you know, if you're against a champion like Zed and you're going to get Zed altered, you might as well just buy Azonius, because the damage most of the time is going to be difficult to avoid. Or if you're against like a ton of poke champions that there's just too much poke that eventually you're going to get hit by something, or if you're against a LeBlanc that's just going to constantly QR you, like that can be fine. But I would not buy these against champs where the damage is very easy to avoid. So if you're against like an Orianna, for example, you have more than enough tools to avoid your damage. I'm not going to go into every example, but basically, guys, just like look at their team and think, like, is it reasonable for me to avoid their damage? And like, am I just buying this kind of like as a crutch for my bad play, or do I like really, really need it? Only buy it if you absolutely need it. Cosmic and Horizon Focus. Now, these can both be second items as well, but honestly, I don't really see a place for either of them. I think Liandry's Cosmic can kind of be good, but I think Liandry's Lichbane is a little better. Horizon Focus, I don't really like it. I think Shadow Flame is better most of the time. So yeah, these are viable second items, but personally, I feel like there are better choices, but they're honestly, you know, they're fine. Like, you're not really losing out much by going them. So if you do really like the, you know, extra movement speed and extra ability haste, like, it's definitely fine for you to do this, but I do think the other builds are a little bit better. Summoners on Ahri, you really only have a couple choices. You will always be taking Flash. This helps a lot in the early game, and it's also pretty good aggressively. You can Flash Charm, or actually you can Charm Flash, as we'll see a bit later in the video. And I think other than that, your real only choices are you can take Ignite, which I think should be your baseline. You can take TP with Corrupting Pot, Time Warp if you're in a very difficult matchup, or you can take Cleanse if you're against a lot of CC, but always take Flash. I think Flash Ignite should definitely be your baseline. You can consider Flash DP in those difficult matchups, and finally Flash Cleanse if you're against a lot of CC. Everything else is honestly not really necessary. I guess you could take Exhaust if you're against an Assassin champion, but again, like, most of the time you'll be fine against assassins because you have so much mobility, and also you do build a bit of extra tankiness with the Everfrost. So I don't really think you need it, but if you really wanted it, like, you could take it, and I think it'd be fine. Okay, Ahri's abilities are relatively simple. So first off, we have the passive. This basically means like whenever you kill 9 minions or monsters, you get a small heal, and then also if you get a takedown, you get a little bit of a heal as well. So this is pretty nice for the laning phase, gives you a little bit of extra sustain. I think also once you start getting stacks, it'll show up on your little hotbar down here. I haven't killed any minions yet, so it won't show it. But this helps a lot with your early laning, so it's pretty important. And if you have that combined with Taste of Blood, as well as like Corrupting Pot if you really need it, and even TP, like there's basically no lane you can't neutralize with that level of extra sustain, so it's actually pretty important. Next up, we have the Q. Line Skill Shot does magic damage on the way out and true damage on the way back, and also on the way back, it is moved by which direction you walk. So if we just throw it in a straight line and don't move, it will come immediately back to us. But if we Q and move, you can redirect it. So sometimes you can use this to like last hit creeps or to hit people. But you know, it's pretty important that you do move while you're doing that, because if you can get that true damage on the way back, it really does add up. So when you're looking to harass in lane with this, try and like move in a way that allows you to kind of hit that second true damage. Next, W, this is like a smart ability in that I believe the way it prioritizes, well, first off, it gives you movement speed, a small burst, and it has like these 3 little sprites, I guess, around you, Foxfires they're called, and they do a little bit of damage. But the main thing is that so it prioritizes targets hit by charm, enemies Ahri's attack, then other champions, and also it executes creeps. So it can be used for a lot of things because it only costs 30 mana and 9-second cooldown. It's very spammable. So yeah, using it to last hit creeps, using it for movement speed to dodge abilities, obviously just extra damage, helping you proc your electrocute. There's a lot of ways to use it, and because it only costs 30 mana, make sure to use it a lot. Compared to your other spells, it's very, very efficient. Next, we have the Charm. So once again, a line skill shot that forces the target to walk towards you. That allows you to very easily hit your other abilities, and it does a little bit of damage as well. So it's a pretty nice ability. There's also a couple combos with this that we will talk about in the next section, but that's basically all you need to know about it for now. Lastly, the ultimate. So this has a reasonably long cooldown, and it's very important to your champion because a lot of the time you'll be using your ult to either like dash in and hit a charm, or to redirect your Q, or just to afford yourself like a bit of extra mobility during the team fight. But basically, it gives you Foxfires. I believe they're called in a similar. Oh, they're called Essence Bolts actually. In a similar way to your W, they kind of just like hit targets around you, and you have 3 dashes by default. You also get an extra stack every time you get a takedown in a team fight. So yeah, sometimes like, yeah, if you can keep using it, you'll get a ton of uses out of it in the team fight if you can keep getting takedowns, and pretty much gives you like crazy mobility. And this is like really what makes you difficult to kill. You know, it's this combination of R, W, and E if you really get in trouble that makes you very difficult to kill. So that's really, really important. So in terms of the order for maxing them, we will want to be maxing Q first. Helps a lot with the wave clear. We will be maxing W second, and lastly E, and of course putting a point and ult whenever we're able to. So fortunately, Ahri's combos are fairly basic. She's not too difficult mechanically. Really, the only advanced mechanic or advanced combo that you need to know is the E flash. So all you need to do for this is press E and then flash immediately after. And what this will do is extend the flash range. It does make it a lot more difficult to react to. So it's pretty good for gank setup as well as catching people off guard in team fights. So this shouldn't take you too long to learn. Just practice it a little bit in practice tool and you should get the hang of it. One other way rather that you can use this is you can actually use it to kind of like charm people that are behind creeps or behind other champs. So if we imagine this is a creep, all you need to do is if you aim your charm like basically where you want it to go, it will fly from the new location you flash to. So if, for example, I put my mouse here and I E-flash upwards, you'll see that the charm now comes from my second location. So what that means is that you can kind of do some fancy E-flashes in order to like get around creeps or to get around people that are blocking. I will say that this isn't going to come up that often. So if you can't do it, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but like the reality is you will get some use out of it sometimes, so it is kind of nice to know how to do it. You have a couple basic trading combos. So the first one obviously is just to hit a max range Q on someone. If you notice they're going for a creep or are otherwise kind of just like going to be in a spot that they're not really going to move from, if you can just like hit a max range Q, it does do quite a bit of damage to them. But you kind of do need to wait for them to be going for a CS or something, because otherwise it is sort of difficult to make sure you hit both parts. Another kind of like easy trade you can go for, especially in the early game, is you can just do an auto W auto, and this will proc electrocute, and the movement speed allows you to kind of like stay on your target. One thing I will say just in general is that it is quite important for you to weave auto attacks between your abilities as Ahri. So whether that's like when you're using your ult or your W or whatever, and especially if you're building Lichbane later on, you'll have a lot of kind of like downtime where you can just like spam out auto attacks. It's kind of similar to LeBlanc in that regard, where you kind of lack the damage to 100 to 0 people, but you can oftentimes make it up for, you can basically just like fit in a ton of extra damage while they're CC'd, or while you're kind of chasing them down with all your abilities. Now, if you do manage to hit a charm on someone in a lane, you can just like blow your entire combo on them like this. It's pretty hard. Like if they get hit by the charm, you can always get all your damage off here, and you can then kind of like walk away from them. Also, if you kind of have like, for example, if they don't have cooldowns, you might have time to kind of like weave in a bunch of orders with it. It kind of depends like what kind of trade you're looking for. Like, are you looking for something where you don't take any damage back whatsoever, or are you just like looking to maximize your damage output? So that kind of depends on like what they're going for and like how they can trade back. Now, most of the time, if you're going for an all-in, you will start it with either an E-flash or just like an R and then E-ing in. And definitely, if you're going for an extended all-in like this, you will definitely like be looking to put in a ton of autos, because otherwise you're just kind of going to lack the damage. As you probably already know, there's many walls that you can ult over, so you might just want to like take some time to go and practice to and figure out which ones you can ult over. I'm not going to show them all here, but to be honest, like most walls can be easily dashed over. There's some ones that kind of can't, like this extra big wall here. But yeah, for the most part, everything is dashable over. One last kind of combo slash tip thing I'm going to show you is method CSing on Ahri. So not every champ can method CS, but if you don't know what method CSing is, I talked about it in my farming guide. Essentially, it means that there's like this consistent, like replicable method or pattern that you can use to CS waves and get all the CS. So on Ahri, once you get enough AP with some DMAT, so you can see here I'm level 7, I have a Lost Chapter and a Dark Steel, as well as a Doran's Ring, and what you can do is you can literally just walk up to this wave, your Q will one-shot the backline, and if you can do it in a way that it's going to kill one melee creep, all the backline, and then all you have to do is worry about CSing 2 creeps on every wave. So similar to LeBlanc, this can make CSing really, really simple. LeBlanc is another champion that uses method CSing to great effect. So this is really important because Ahri is one of those champions that should have very, very high CS because of this reason. As long as you don't fall behind, it will be very, very easy to farm waves. And once you reach this point, you gain so much time, and you can use that time in order to roam, ward the jungle, just do like whatever you want really. But that's really important, is reaching that point where you can method CS. All right, Ahri's laning phase. So Ahri's laning phase is kind of divided into 2, maybe even 3 phases. So really it's the first 5 levels, Ahri is at her weakest point of the game. This is where you don't have great trading power. You also don't really have great access to your mobility. And it's really the only time of the game that other mids can really like take advantage of you. So in your first 5 levels, it's going to be a lot about like defensive laning, kind of like positioning the lane in a way that you can set up ganks, because that's really the only threat that you have, and trying to hit that first base at a relatively even state. I would say if you're even at 6 as Ahri, you're probably winning, especially if you're against a matchup that is like meant to bully you early. Now, so I'll kind of show you here, this is going to be like your typical Ahri matchup. There are some matchups where if you're against like very weak early game champions, you might be able to get some kills, and I will show some examples of that. But for the most part, in the first 5 levels, you really will just be looking to farm just like last hit and kind of use your abilities, either just like hold them defensively so that you have the cooldown so that you're hard to punish, or you can use them to thin out the wave. But just be very careful how many cooldowns you use on the wave, because you might run out of mana, or just because you're on cooldown, you might get punished by the enemy laner. So you do have to be a little bit mindful about that. But yeah, for the most part, in this like first 5 levels, just look to last hit. Don't look to trade too much. Just look to trade defensively, unless you're against a champion that's very weak in the early game, and try and set up the wave in a way that they're gankable. After, like, we'll show it after 6, but after that you can be a bit more aggressive. But for now, you can see here I am just like looking to last hit. And it's pretty much just going to be a massive snooze fest, because we're playing 2 champions here that are now very weak in the early game. You can see I do fish for a little bit of Q harass, but ultimately it wouldn't really make a difference because I don't have much kill threat on her. I do drop a little bit of defensive vision for our team, and that is one thing you should look to do, because Ahri is not a champion that has a lot of pressure in the early game. Your only real pressure in this pre-6 comes from your gank setup and from your wards. It's not like you're really going to be pressuring the lane. You can get involved in some skirmishes, like you are actually a decent skirmisher early. You do have CC and you're going to have Ignite as well, but yeah, basically you're just not really going to be in a position to take over your lane in the same way that a champion like Lucian or a champion like Syndra, Orianna, those sort of like strong laners might. So I'm kind of just going to skip through this here. Pretty much just like a snooze fest of farming, although we actually have a skirmish here. I actually forgot about this. So you can see like you're very happy to get involved in stuff like this as Ahri. Got an E-flash there, though I did use both my cooldowns. And Udyr got the kill, which was a bit depressing, but because I keep the wave kind of in the spot, and Udyr has like such insane gank setup with Ghost against like immobile mages, he is able just to kind of chase this to lay it down. So yeah, eventually we do manage to pick up this kill, I believe. I don't think she gets out. Yeah, but ultimately it doesn't. Oh, she actually did get out. It doesn't really matter. This is how you want to play the early game as Ahri. So the first 5 levels, just to reiterate for like the 10th time, just focus on defensive laning, focus on getting as much CS as possible, and using your abilities defensively. Don't use them too much on the wave unless you can thin it out without getting punished for it. Because sometimes if you use your important cooldowns, like if you waste your Q or you waste your E, something like that, you can be punished quite heavily for it. So just be a little bit mindful about that, but that's just kind of like more like actual laning, like fundamentals, as opposed to like something Ahri specific. So you can see here, managed to pick up a kill on Talia. Now I'm going to show some other examples of the pre-6 of some of the easier lanes that you might be able to trade into. So Zillion here is a very weak champion in the early game, one that Ahri can actually bully, and believe me, there aren't too many champions that Ahri can bully pre-6, but when you're level 2, you can either take your E or your W depending on the lane, and often you can get some trades with that. You also see sometimes in the laning phase, if you're against a melee champion, people even starting W, and that's because you can do the auto W auto trade, which is pretty nice as well. So that's one thing you can consider, especially if you're against a weaker early game melee, although there aren't too many of them in the meta right now, but a champion like Sylas, for example, that is like very strong, again, kind of like after 6, honestly has a very similar power curve to you. If you can bully them out in the like early game when they are a bit weaker, you can get very, very ahead of that. I actually don't think I would have killed that guy if you didn't flash forward, but I'll show you one more example after this. So here I'm laning against the Zac. So again, not really a champ that's going to bully you early. You can bully out some of these like melee champions if they try and trade into you too much. So yeah, just to kind of like reiterate, against like these like weaker early game champs, you can look to punish them, but ultimately like you're pretty happy if your pre-6 is going even, and really your pre-6 objectives are just like being somewhat even in farm, like having a relatively good base. Yeah, you really don't want too much volatility pre-6. Obviously, again, you can get involved in skirmishes and you can set up ganks, but it's really, really important that you don't die pre-6. That is like maybe the most important part of Ahri, because that's really the only time where you can be taken out of the game. After that, you're pretty much always going to have impact. So I really want to like emphasize that, because I see too many people kind of like lose the game and that first 5 levels is Ahri, and that just doesn't need to happen. That's like the one point of this game or of the game where this champion is weak. So if you can make sure to play that pre-6 out well and just kind of like know what you're after, have some sort of game plan, know that your pre-6 isn't the most important. And that should make kind of that early laning a lot more solid for you. Now your post-6 laning phase is Ahri pretty much just has 2 phases. So there's that time that you hit level 6, and then there's that second phase where you get the ability to wave clear the backline in one queue. So basically, after you hit level 6 is Ahri. Some of the time you can look to all in your lane. It's not going to be super common that you're in a lane that you can actually all in unless you're already kind of fed. You don't really have the ability to 100 to 0 people, but if you do get a good trade and can get them down to about like 70 or yeah, maybe like 70 or 65% HP, you can look for an all in on them. But Ahri's real strength is pushing the lane and roaming to other lanes. So pretty much after 6, you're always going to be wanting to like spam shove that wave and look to kind of play with your jungler or roam to other lanes and stuff like that. If people do contest you for the wave after level 6, you can look to fight them. As I said, like Ahri is quite a bit stronger at this stage of the game, and especially if you have like level advantage or something, you can definitely look to fight people. So don't be afraid of that. While, like I said before, in the pre-6, you do kind of have to mainly defensively lane. Like you can see here, I actually missed like literally every skill shot on this guy and still managed to kill him. So it's pretty disgusting once you get to this point in the game. I'd say kind of the main things that you need to know for this game is the main thing you need to know for this kind of stage of the game is it's a lot more about your fundamentals. So it's stuff like if you have like good roaming fundamentals, which I've done a guide on, you'll kind of know what to do. But your general kind of just like game plan for post 6 is you want to be able to get priority on waves and use that priority to get things. So you want to be able to like get deep vision in your jungle. You want to be able to roam to other lanes. You can even force all-ins on your lane. But really like that's the point where you can start taking over the game. And a big reason why Ahri is so strong is because she not only pushes the wave extremely fast, she has really good roaming because like she has mobility and ganks it up, like she has her E, but also it's very difficult to punish her for actually getting the priority. So many other champions, while they're getting priority, can be easily ganked, right? But Ahri is pretty much ungankable as a champion, so you can play very, very aggressively on your lane. You can clear out the waves extremely fast and look to pressure the map. So to kind of summarize the laning phase for you guys, it's kind of just like 2 main phases. In the first 5 levels, play very defensively. Just make sure you're setting up the wave like in a gankable way, trying to get some wards down. That's where your pressure is going to come from. Yeah, defensively trade. Really don't fall behind in this first 5 levels. If you're going to get poked out, take TP and corrupting pot. If you're going to get all in, just like keep the wave on your side, play safe. It's so important that you do not, like, especially don't die, but ideally don't fall behind in those first 5 levels. You have the tools to get through that kind of stage of the game without dying or falling behind. And then once you hit that level 6, you're really looking to get priority on every wave if you can. Start pressuring the map, getting deep vision, roaming to other waves or to other lanes. You can look to all in your opponent if you have Ignite and they take some bad trades. So yeah, I think that pretty much is it for the laning phase. Team fighting on Ahri is, my opinion, what really separates like good Ahris from bad Ahris. So I think Ahri is a champion that has like a ton of diversity when it comes to team fighting. There's a lot of things you can do. You can play like a typical front to back where you just peel your AD carry like with your E and your Everfrost. Alternatively, like you can dive onto their important carries. You can, follow up and engage like with your ult. Again, you can kite back with your R. So there's a lot of different things you can do. And that's why I think understanding team fighting fundamentals on Ahri is very, very important. Again, I have a video on this, but I am going to explain stuff for you. So generally what you want to do like, kind of before your fight is identify the win conditions. So really, like one real easy way to look at this is just like who's fed. Like if your AD is fed and their AD is not, then like maybe you really want to peel your AD. Or if they have like a really fed member, like one really fed guy that you need to kill, it can be very easy for you to like find a flank angle onto them and kind of, just like make their life difficult pretty much. So you have a lot of options. I would say it really does depend on the game state, and the easiest way to kind of identify that is like look at the team comps, just like look at how they function. Is this an engage comp? Is it a poke comp? Do they peel back? And who are their most important targets? Something I always say in my team fighting videos are the most important things to consider for team fights is 1, target prioritization. So like who is the most important target? So number them 1 to 5, as in like, so Kog'Maw might be a 1 here. He is the most important. And then like Wukong or something might be a 5. He might be the least important. And then also think about like threat assessment. So think about like what cooldowns or champions are very threatening to you. So for example, you might find it difficult to dash in as Ahri if they still have Veigar cage up, or if they still have Thresh hook, or even if they have Thresh Lantern and they're going to Lantern like the AD carry out from safety. So think about those things. But the best advice I can kind of give you, of course I'm going to show you some examples, but really the best advice I can give you for team fighting as Ahri is be patient. Like you have a lot of cooldowns, and you're definitely like, you're not really a burst mage. You're more of like a cooldown mage, I guess. Like you want to get multiple rotations off. You want to be able to get like multiple charms off, and just like have like a more extended fight. You're not really like a DPS champ, so it's sort of weird. But yeah, that is like sort of how you want to play out a fight. So I'll show here. Here I'm going onto this important Kog'Maw. I managed to get the charm, also managed to get the Wukong ult, and then I kind of just like disengage from the fight, peel back for a bit before re-engaging. You can see that like with getting the dashes back, it allows you a lot of options. You have ways to get in and out of the fight repeatedly, and that really like, yeah, it just like gives you a lot of options, and there's a lot of things and a lot of like plays you can make with that. You can go over walls, you can come back, you can look for flash charms, you can look for R charms, stuff like that. But really, like, it's very important that you create a lot of impact in fights. Make sure your charms are on targets that actually matter. Just charming tanks generally won't do that much. But if you can charm a carry or charm a bruiser or something like that, generally it'll be much better. Here's another example from a bit earlier in a game. So again, just like playing slow, kind of like saving my dashes to kind of get around them in the team fight. Don't have to commit too early. You can see I'm just kind of like, yeah, I'm just like playing the fight super slow. I don't have to just like blow everything straight away. Kind of just a quick skirmish example there. So here's one that's maybe a bit more kind of traditional, something that is closer to a front to back. But if you can start a team fight like this by getting kind of some CC on an important person, that's pretty valuable. But you can see here, this is more like a traditional mage fighting where you're just kind of like peeling your ADC. You're playing like a front to back team fight, which is something that Ahri can do. So yeah, it's just like you really got to be adaptable. I think it's super important. Like, obviously it's super important on every champ to understand the fundamentals, but just Ahri is a champion that rewards fundamentals a lot. So if you have like strong fundamental team fighting, laning, roaming understanding, you really get a lot out of the champ. She's not particularly like mechanically intensive. So she's not a champ that, is going to have a big difference between someone that has say 100 games of Ahri and someone that has like 1,000 games of Ahri. I'll show you one last example of a team fight where I actually misplayed it and it kind of led to, like, we still won the game, but it was kind of bad. So here I actually used like my cooldowns at the start. As you can see here, I invested an ult and an E into getting this Thresh's flash, which isn't too bad, but now you have to kind of like respect that you don't have cooldowns for a while. I've invested something, I don't have cooldowns, I don't have threat for a while, and what I do is I try and greed. I actually try and like go for a bit more. I do get a big Everfrost onto the team, but then I can't really get away from this Wukong, and You know, it's like if I don't die here, I can continue putting out rotations. So yeah, it's really important that you guys are patient, that you don't rush stuff like that, because it's like if you don't die, you will just like keep putting out rotation after rotation, and it's very, very difficult to kill an Ahri that plays on her range. But if you make things easy for the enemy team, if you do dash in without your cooldowns, or you know, you just like dash in when it's not really a good time to, it'll make the team fight a lot easier for them and shut you down really easily. So I think the Ahri matchup tier list looks something like this. There are a couple champions missing from the list, which are Akshan and Vex. I'd say Akshan maybe in a like low hard category, and Vex probably somewhere in the skill category. In general, I don't think Ahri has any very hard matchups. She's a very good blind pick, and I think even a lot of these matchups that are listed as hard, you can deal with them. You know, champs like Azir, Lux, or Victor that want to poke you out, you can take TP against them, TP corrupting part, and oftentimes you can weather their sustain. And also, a lot of them are mobile and very gankable. Like, not so much Azir, but like these three are very gankable, right? And these assassins, if you manage your wave correctly, you can do pretty well against. And after 6, like, you have the mobility that they can't really punish you anymore. So like these matchups are honestly not too bad. Honestly, the scariest matchups are champions like Kassadin that also have a somewhat weak laning phase but scale much better than you. That can be quite scary. And there are even some champions in the free category, for example, like Corki or Veigar, that I've got them as free because matchup-wise, they're very, very easy. But as the lane, or as the game goes on, they can be quite difficult. You know, I think Veigar is actually pretty good into Ahri in team fights, although in the early game, like, you can bully him, you have gank set up against him. And like Corki, for example, just scales like an absolute monster. So while these champs are very easy for you in the 1v1 in the early game, as the game goes on, it can be kind of difficult for you. In general, the champs Ahri does best against are kind of champions that don't have the strongest laning phases or are very susceptible to CC, either because they're immobile or because they have to play very, very aggressive. You know, a champion like Lucian, for example, that always has to play aggressive, can really struggle to find windows against you when you have like your E and your Everfrost, especially in team fights and stuff like that. I will say there are some matchups on this list that actually do take some practice. Like, if you're new to Ahri, you might find some of these matchups to be quite difficult. You know, like a champion like Vlad can be very punishing if you make a mistake, or a champion like Silas that kind of like the matchup hinges on you punishing them in the early game. But I think, yeah, just in general, I really wouldn't worry about blind picking. I think Ahri is the best blind pick mid laner in the game at the moment. And I think pretty much every matchup is at least neutralizable, if not winnable, once you know what to do. So if you aren't sure how to play a matchup, you can just go to YouTube and look up, say, like Ahri versus LeBlanc, and then just like watch it, and you'll get some idea of how to trade and how to play out the lane and those sort of objectives. But I think if you stick to what we kind of said in the laning phase, play safe generally during that like level 1 to 5 period, unless your enemy mid is also very weak in the early game. And then after 6, a lot of the time, you can even just ignore your lane, just like spam push, look to help out your jungler, and roam to other lanes. So everyone, that is going to be it for this video. Hopefully you learned everything you need to know about playing Ahri. If you didn't, you can put something in the comments below and I will reply to it. I reply to like 99% of the comments, but I think in general, Ahri is not the most difficult champion to learn, and she's really, really useful to have in your pool because she is such a good blind pick, and she also adds like a lot of mobility to your pool for like a relatively low investment. That being said, Ahri is a very fundamental champ and will test your fundamentals, although she's a bit more forgiving than, say, another fundamental champion like Orianna. You know, Orianna tests the fundamentals really well, and you get punished really hard for messing them up, whereas Ahri, I think, still tests fundamentals decently well, but doesn't test the laning phase as well as Orianna might, and is perhaps like a bit more forgiving in terms of mispositioning and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's a really fun champ, really OP at the moment. So thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.